Hi, and we are the Coalition Loud and Proud Civilly Disobedient Media, broadcasting live, well, at the legal offices of one Jose Batista, state representative for District 12, who, in the midst of, I'll just call this time of year, if you're a sitting representative or senator, sheer infernal chaos. Hundreds of bills. One of the branches of government's a little bit behind. We won't go there today in hearings. Getting calls from every imaginable legislature, every imaginable public interest group, every imaginable special interest group. But he's taken time today to discuss some legislation. Ironically, that's going to be heard tomorrow. And I'll call this bail on 32. And that's the hashtag. He's given us a few minutes to talk about that. First off, this is the first time we've had you on the air with us, so just get a little bit of getting to know you. You're a lifelong resident of Providence. You're an attorney. What type of practice do you have here in town?
So this month I'm turning 8 years old. My legal career is turning 8. I passed the bar in May of 2015. My first job was as a public defender, which is where a lot of my interest in criminal justice reform comes from. And I opened up my own practice going on 7 years now, where I still do a lot of criminal defense, but do a little bit more family law, divorces, custody, personal injury, a few contracts, and so I did the bulk of it as criminal and family law, but I'm your standard solo guy. So I do what most solo practitioners do, which is criminal, family, injury, some straight contracts here and there.
Right. You have a practice here in the CIC building downtown,
Yeah.
and talk to us briefly about growing up, your experiences here in Providence. I mean, you even as a young man, you've lived through some tumultuous times. What was it like for you here in town?
I mean, there's a lot of different things we could talk about living in Providence. Obviously, I've lived in South Providence, the Broad Street community, my entire life, and some of my earlier memories are of the Dominican Festival, which is the second Sunday of every August. My father's an immigrant; he was one of the people who helped found this festival, and so I see a lot of my life and my time as my father was an immigrant, my folks were immigrants. They built a foundation for us to go to school, etc. So I think how can I build on top of that and use the privilege that I have as a result in expand opportunity for people. That's some of the bright side, right? Dominican Festival, Pride in Broad Street. I do remember being in sixth grade at Roger Mills Middle School when Jennifer Rivera was murdered.
Right.
She was in eighth grade when I was there. Her brother was in my class. And so that was something, I was 11, 12 years old. That's something in my childhood that really stands out. And it's something that's still relevant today, right? When we think about witness protection, et cetera.
For people who don't know, she was assassinated
Yeah.
in the fullest sense of the word, sitting on, I'm from the New York City area, so we call it a stoop, your porch. She's sitting on her porch with her family, light of day.
Yeah.
Some rather notable figures in Rhode Island politics were more than peripherally involved in both the prosecution that she was a witness in, as well as the defense. So that was when you think about that era, you think about Jennifer Rivera, you think about Officer Cornell Young, and some of the really dramatic moments which brought to light the issues and the challenges facing different neighborhoods in
Yeah.
Rhode Island.
Yeah, you mentioned Cornell Young. That was just a few months. They were a few months apart.
Right.
And there were actually some other incidents that took place around that time. And so, you talk about growing up and coming of age, and when is the point where you realize how things work or how things don't work. And, now my time as an attorney and as a legislator, on the one hand, I am a person of color. On the other hand, I grew up in a community of people of color. And so you are aware of racial interactions, but you're also not. And the older I get, becoming an attorney, becoming a legislator, going into rooms in which you otherwise wouldn't be, being invited to conversations of which you otherwise wouldn't be, you kind of have this moment where you're like, oh wow, we used to theorize about why things are bad or how bad they are, and then you get to see how certain judges think about things, or certain legislators think about things. It's like, oh wow, things are really bad, right? In fact, it's almost like that moment in The Wizard of Oz where you pull back the curtain. And you're like, oh wait, I don't think I want to see any more about what's going on back there. But I'm making light of the situation, but this is obviously very serious stuff, and you try to take as much information as you can and craft a solution.
Talk to me about organizations like DARE, Direct Action for Rights and Equality. I mean, really, a seminal member of the community. Really, they've had an incredible impact over generations. Full disclosure, I am technically a member of DARE. And, the peaceful civil disobedience, while at the same time, different efforts of theirs, for example, like DARE behind, beyond the walls. Where you've got active work with people who are re-entering society into difficult circumstances. What has their impact been as far as you're concerned in the community?
I really love their and the work that they're doing. I really appreciate the broader community. There's no question in my mind that we are still today fighting the same fight we were in the civil rights movement, and even before that, right?
Hmm.
Some people have said to me, I've spoken to a lot of police officers, spoken to a lot of people who think differently than I do, trying to get solutions in this arena. And some people will say to you, oh, well, it's like, it's like all of a sudden George Floyd happened and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, this problem has existed since decades and centuries before
Right.
George Floyd. Maybe you realized it when George Floyd happened, but it doesn't
Hmm.
mean it's the first time it happened. So I appreciate there because organizations like that have been around for decades, really pushing on the issue, really bringing it to light. And sadly, it takes something like a George Floyd for the whole world to see like, oh wow, this is bad, right?
Right.
But people like DARE and organizations like that that we work with, Center for Justice comes to mind, which is relatively new, but on the same wavelength. They're really the foundation. They're really doing the work, the grassroots. Politicians come and go, elected officials come and go, but organizations like that are really like the the foundation of the community. I'm grateful for the work, and we're working together to work on this bill, and I feel really good about it. And hopefully, we have a good hearing tomorrow. One of my favorite moments as a legislator so far is being at there and being at a table. The whole table is filled with young men of color,
Hmm.
and sadly, some of them know the law better than I do.
Right.
Not because they've read it in school, but because they've lived it. And to have that powerful experience of listening to people advocate for themselves, this is what the judge said to me. This is how the judge treated me. Those are really powerful stories. And I look forward to bringing those stories to the State House, to our committee tomorrow night, and having my colleagues listen to those stories and effect change as a result.
And folks need to understand that while New York City had stop and frisk, we had the jump out boys.
Mm.
All right, we've had serious issues with regard to Leobor. That's another subject that you've immersed yourself in. They've also had serious issues with regard to policing and some of the recent haunted past of interactions between citizens and the police department. And yet there is a sense of hope. The last police chief really did a lot to advance that, Mr. Clements. But at the same time, there's still so much work to be done when we look at, say, Officer Dolan case in Pawtucket.
Mm.
And while there's been a great deal of aggressive hiring of people of color and people of variety of backgrounds in the city of Providence, there are still many cities in this state for whom that is well, let's just call it a distinct challenge. Explain to us what a 32F bail violation is.
Oh, okay. I thought I was going somewhere else.
Okay.
32F. So 32F is the name or the number, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
of the Superior Court Rules of Criminal Procedure.
Mm-hmm.
And I should take a step back and take you a little bit through what it's like to be arrested and what happens and why 32F becomes popular. Let's say you get accused of assaulting somebody, which, people who are not lawyers hear the word assault and you think, oh man, that's serious. An assault, especially a misdemeanor assault, could be as simple as you putting your hand on somebody, right?
Right.
The legal definition of an assault is somebody touching you without your permission. So it doesn't say punching you, hurting you, making you bleed, touching you
Right.
without their permission. Police officers know this very well because if they're in the course of arresting you and your elbow should graze their uniform, they are very quick to charge you with assaulting a police officer. And so part of what I've been so alarmed with is the disincentive that exists in our criminal justice system to take a case to trial. If you're accused of something as a defendant, especially as a poor defendant, which is the majority of people that I've represented, you don't have a lot of leverage. You don't have a lot of things you can do. You're accused of a crime, you can either plea, which means admit that you committed a crime and negotiate a sentence, or take the case to trial. Sadly, I know from experience there are some judges who are very not shy about telling you, you have the right to go to trial,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not going to go well for you. It's very clearly stated. And I've wrestled and had all sorts of traumas and nightmares dealing with the judges, some of them. Some of them, beautiful people, wonderful people. God bless them, my mentors. But some of them are have a very distorted view of what the criminal justice system is there to do, i.e., is there to serve them and the way they think about the world, as opposed to serving civilians, right?
Right.
I don't care if you committed a crime, there's a process. that the cornerstone of this country is supposed to be the Constitution and Fourth Amendment, etc. But when it comes to poor people, especially poor people of color, all that stuff goes out the window. Why is that important? Because a lot of times people get, you take the jump out boys, right? Stop and frisk. It's so easy for folks in my community to get jammed up, right? Walking down the street with a hoodie. Police will like openly admit that they police areas like mine, South Providence, differently than they police somewhere like Blackstone Boulevard, right?
Mhm.
They will admit to me that me, as a person of color, wearing a black hoodie walking down the street is going to arise suspicion. And so if I want to attract attention, that's all I have to do. I get stop and search, maybe I got a vape on me, whatever, right? It's so easy to get caught up, so easy to get jammed up, so easy to plea. So when you plea, if you don't go to jail, the step below that is you're pleading to probation. What does that mean? You're promising that you're not going to get in any more trouble. Probation means the court is supervising you in some way, which the amount of people in prison is one problem. The amount of people under government supervision is another problem, because we're putting them on the slippery slope to go right back to prison, which is where 32F comes in. So if you violate the promise to keep the peace and be a good behavior, which in law is interpreted as if you pick up another crime, if you're accused of another crime, you will be known as violating Rule 32F, or probation. It didn't always used to be this way, but somewhere along the way, we kind of got stuck in, it turned into a default. Once you're on probation, just being accused of another crime, you're a violator of probation. And more problematically, you are held without bail. It doesn't matter if you are a billionaire, it doesn't matter if your mom's willing to sign off the house, you're held without bail for a solid 10 to 14 days before anybody even thinks about you, right? Which sadly, 10 to 14 days is like just enough time. If you have a job, you're probably going to lose that job. If you have benefits, you're probably going to lose those benefits. Any sort of tie that you have to community, 10 to 14 days is just about enough time to lose those ties. So we take a person who may not even be guilty of this new thing they're charged with, cut them off from society. Let's say in 14 days, we just say, oh, you know what, we messed up. Now we're going to let you go. Let them go, but the damage has been done.
Right.
Now that person who you alleged to be a criminal is now more likely to become a criminal because you made it that much more difficult for them to get a job, that much more difficult for them to have a house. I mean, it's hard for anybody to have a house nowadays in Rhode Island, let alone, you know what I mean? So it's part of what we're trying to do is draw attention to the systemic nature of this. Part of what I said on the steps of the court the other day was that, you know, a lot of times you're going to, and I've heard so many of the defenses to this, you know, you're calling me names. We're not talking about individual people. That there are individual actors in this, absolutely. But the most diabolical thing about this is that it is systemic. Rules like 32F. I think there's room for judges to have discretion. In fact, that's what they said. Well, if we pass this bill, the judiciary says you're going to take away our discretion. No, you have discretion. You're not using it, right? And so we need to change this law to not to make you use it, but to draw attention to this problem, right? We're not saying release people. We're not saying, you know, forgive people. We're saying there's a process. At a minimum, people should be set bail. No, if we're honest, my next concern is that they are going to set bail. Let's say we pass the bill. Enormous change, big deal. So they are going to set bail. Not going to set bail like $10,000, right? Too high for people to make,
right? Which
will be the next battle that we'll have to fight. But that's fundamentally what it's about. Letting people have a chance to have bail while we figure out what's happening with the case. When I was a public defender, I had 2,000 cases in 1 year. 40% of them were dismissed. 2 out of every 5 cases that I had were dismissed. Now, you might look at that stat and be tempted to think that I was some all-star attorney. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. I would submit to you that that number, especially that big number, 40% of the cases dismissed, suggests to me that there's a lot of cases being brought that should not be brought.
Right.
A lot of petty charges that are being brought that just really don't need to be. And you know, they'll say something like, oh, well, the case got dismissed, no harm done. Sometimes my client had to come to court 5, 6, 7 times.
Right.
Lose a day out of court, hire somebody to take care of their kids. Like, it's not all's well that ends well. Like, this is actual stuff and people's lives in the mix. And so that's a little bit about what we're trying to do.
You know, it strikes me that the concept of discretion has been lost in our criminal justice system. And, you know, you have 32F in Rhode Island, you've got 3 strikes and you're out, minimum mandatory. You've got all sorts of setting guidelines that have gone, quite frankly, gone wild. And so as a result, the judge, who is ostensibly spent a lifetime in the system, understands the system, is unparalleled in his or her knowledge of the law, has perhaps come as a product of the criminal justice system. All of that wisdom, knowledge, discretion, it seems like it's all been lost.
I wouldn't say all of it. I mean, a lot of it is. I think some of the things you're talking about are true, more so at the federal level, the mandatory minimums. And in that case, I know of extraordinary judges who have said on the record, I don't want to do this, right?
Mhm.
Whatever sentence I'm about to impose on you, this is not my choice, but this is the way the law is, which is a battle that we have to fight at Congress, but that's a whole other thing up there. And so, what the things we can control at the statewide level, it is what we're trying to do. And I'll just tell you quickly one of the why I think we're at this situation, right? Because I study this from every angle.
Mhm.
And I try very hard to come up with a real solution, right? One of the points I was making out there on the steps was I was talking about the word system. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, I like the word system. I read in a book that it stands for save yourself serious time, energy, and money. So I have a law office, right? I try every day to create systems in my law office that will save myself time, energy, and money. The problem is, I don't want to believe the worst about our court system, but it is a system. And when you think about what is its objective in a perfect world would be to fair and administer justice, whatever else, sadly, we know that there's been too many cases in history where the court system has been there, or the government in general has been there to oppress, right? Take away the right to vote, take away the freedom of whatever else. And so sometimes I worry that there are too many parts of our court system that are remnants of the past, whether you want to think about 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. And why do judges not use discretion? Because the system is created to save time, save energy, save money. So don't worry about the individuals. I know they're all going to come up here and say, I didn't do this, whatever else. We don't have the time, energy, or money. We're meant to save time, save energy, save money. Just block them all out. It sounds ridiculous, but when you're in court day after day after day after day after day for years, representing poor people in particular, it's like, damn, it kind of feels like that's the way to look at it, right? Like, we don't have the time, the energy. I give you another example, right? A little unwritten rule. No, this is not said anywhere, but it's understood. Most calendars in district court, when you have the criminal court, you're the public defender, you walk in there with 20, 30 files, you're expected to be done by lunchtime. Nothing good happens after lunchtime. Now, of course, not every, I don't want to speak for every judge. Some judges,
Right.
wonderful people. But generally speaking, you better be done by lunch, right? So now you got 30, 40 cases, public defender. Most of your clients have some sort of difficulty that you have to try to manage, most of them, right? And you have to finish that by lunchtime. How many minutes is that per case, right? So there's just all these sorts of challenges that are stacked against you. I remember I'd walk into the courtroom as a public defender. I would feel like the prosecutor's against me. Well, they're against you naturally, right? Because you guys have opposing judges. Feels like the judge is against you, the sheriff who's in the courtroom is against you, the clerk in there is against you, right? And so again, I'm making light of the situation. I don't want to be general, but I have walked into a situation like that, and it's like, okay, here I am, 27, 28-year-old public defender, doing the best that I can, and I got like 6 professionals, and they all want to see my guy lose, right? You wonder why things start to look the way that they do.
How often do you find a situation where someone has been picked up on an alleged probation violation, and because of the circumstances of their life, perhaps things they've actually done in the past, they're compelled to plead out to some type of arrangement where you're just dragging them back down again. You're just
All the time.
what are I think the term is the pipeline to prison just seems to be incredibly steep and slippery, and
It is.
is that in fact a big problem?
It happens all the time. I mean, I would call it extorting a plea. That's why sometimes it bothers me when people talk about people who are convicted of crimes or whatever else. Whenever I hear somebody convicted of a crime, is there a portion of our society in which real violence, real crime take place? Of course. And should those people be held accountable? Of course. When you look at the criminal justice system insofar as my people are concerned, South Providence, immigrants, low income, those categories of people,
Mm-hmm.
we're getting jammed up for things that other people otherwise wouldn't get jammed up for. I'll give you an example. Central Falls. One time I stood in a backyard in Central Falls, and I happened to, which is, not only the smallest city in Rhode Island, I happen to work for the city of Central Falls and love the city of Central Falls, but it is very densely populated, probably the most densely populated municipality we have. I remember standing in one backyard one time and just being struck by something. I said, wow, I counted all of the different houses that I could see within my field of sight in Central Falls in one backyard. Take a guess how many houses were in my field of vision. Take a guess. Or how many houses can you see from your backyard?
2 or 3?
From my house in Providence, I can see like 7. If I'm really trying, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In Central Falls, it was 37 houses that I could see. That you could see.
Mm-hmm.
People living on top of each other. You know, that's not a crime. Sometimes people have an argument. That's not a crime. But the fact that you live so close together makes it more likely somebody else hears you, somebody else misunderstands,
Right.
somebody else calls the police. Now the police are showing up at your house. You didn't even call them. Maybe you don't speak English, and it's just a recipe for disaster, right? So I saw Larry Crowther in Philadelphia, somebody I really admire, and the way he describes the criminal justice system is just a car crash, just like a violent pile of car after car after car. I try not to take it out on people and make it sound like people are terrible or evil. I appreciate that working within that system is hard. Regular moms and dads, friends of ours that work for the court system, but that's again it's diabolical, right? It's a system created so that everybody can kind of point the finger at each other. A lot of times I'd be in court, I'd read a police report, you could tell there's like some things in there that are not true. What do you hear from the judge? Well, the judges, I don't know what happened. We have to rely on the police report. They were there, right? Then you go on the street, you try to do police oversight like I did, and you see the way they write the police report. What do they say? Well, we don't know what happened. The judges will figure it out. And meanwhile, here we are in between, and like we're not really ever getting our day in court, right? Everybody assumes it's happening over here. Everybody assumes it's happening over there. One big magic trick, and it just keeps happening over and over and over again.
Right. No, I mean, I'm a city kid. I'm originally from the wrong side of the Holland Tunnel of New York City in Jersey, and the petty dramas that occur in life that are sort of a distant memory for the folks who've made it to the burbs become literally an everyday part of someone's soap opera. In a town like Pawtucket, CF, the south or the north end of Providence. And as the saying goes, what we like to say at the Coalition Radio Network, it appears always that in the halls of justice is usually found in the halls. And so as a result, your fates are left up to nameless, shapeless people that you'll never meet. Luck of the draw, it would appear.
Really is luck of the draw. Really is.
Well, we appreciate your time. This is what I believe is going to be the first of a series of conversations that you and I are going to have about ongoing events as they affect the city of Providence, the state writ large. There is a whole lot of criminal justice reform that needs to take place in the state. Everything from Leobar, which you're involved in, serious reform of solitary confinement, life without parole issues. I mean, for a state that appears at some level to be so progressive, there are just so many challenges. But I'm grateful for this beginning in your time today. How can folks reach out to you as an attorney, but also as a state legislator?
Sure. So I try to be active on social media. I have a Twitter, JF Batista 12. Also, my phone number is on. I use all my personal information on everything. So, best phone number, my personal phone number, 401-533-2226. If you want to call my law office, 401-415-0151. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook. I'm not hard to find. You Google my name. Yep. Once you read all the bad news and stuff like that, somewhere in between there is all my contact information.
From an editorial perspective, because some people call this activism, I call it having an editorial perspective. We're grateful for your involvement in this issue. This is the nitty gritty. This is the real Providence, the real Rhode Island, and your attention to this level of detail as it impacts people's lives here in the city, quite frankly, is impressive. So we thank you for your time. And like I said, I have a feeling we're going to have some more conversations.
Thank you. I appreciate it.